Let me tell you a story, my friends. My name is Haim, and I'm an old soul from Odessa, now resting in Haifa, Israel. I've seen 80 winters, each one teaching me something about the quiet storms inside us. This tale isn't just words. It's a mirror for those of us over 65 when the years start whispering secrets we never asked for. Sit with me like we're sharing tea on a Shabbat evening. I'll speak slow, from the heart, because what I'm about to share changed how I see the twilight of life. It's about a man named Israel, much like many of you. Strong once, now carrying the weight of what was lost. The wind off the sea in Haifa whipped at Israel's face like an old grudge. He stood at Sarah's grave, the stone cold under his trembling hand. 40 years of marriage gone in a whisper. He clutched the brass Shabbat candlestick they'd lit together every Friday. Now it slipped from his fingers, clattering against the earth. And then, her voice. Israel, you're not alone. But why can you hear me now? His heart pounded. The cemetery was empty, just shadows dancing from a single flickering light. He spun around. Nothing. Sarah had been dead a year. Was his mind cracking, the years stealing more than his strength? Sweat beaded on his brow, despite the chill. This wasn't grief. This was something alive, pulling at him from the dark. Israel stumbled back to his small apartment in Haifa, the door creaking like a sigh. He collapsed into the chair by the window, staring at the dusty photos on the wall. Him and Sarah young in Moscow, laughing with their boy Aaron. It's nothing, he muttered to himself. Just the age catching up, playing tricks. His hands shook as he poured a glass of tea, but then he saw it. A folded note from Sarah, tucked in the drawer he'd forgotten. Her handwriting steady as ever. Remember David in the Psalms, old age is like wine, it deepens if you let it. He unfolded it fully, heart racing. But wait. The candlestick, the one he'd dropped at the grave. It sat on the kitchen table now, polished and whole, as if he'd carried it home without remembering. How? He hadn't touched it after the fall. Panic rose like bile. He paced the room, the walls closing in. Then a knock, soft but insistent. It was his neighbor, old Haim, me in this story, peering through the crack in the door. Israel, my friend, the Talmud says the dead speak through the living sometimes. Don't push it away. Israel slammed the door, but the words stuck. His reflection in the mirror looked hollow, eyes sunken from nights without sleep. Why now, in these later years? The loneliness he'd buried under routines was bubbling up, twisting memories into ghosts. And that voice, Sarah's, it wasn't angry. It was pleading. Each step he took made the apartment feel smaller, the air thicker with questions. What if old age wasn't just fading, but waking something buried deep? Israel sank onto the edge of the bed, the note crumpling in his fist. The room spun a little, not from drink, but from the weight of it all. Sarah's absence wasn't just a hole in his days, it was a trap, her echo dragging him back to what he'd let slip away over decades. Work in Moscow had kept him late, missing Aaron's first steps, Sarah's quiet tears. Now, at 65, retired and alone in this foreign land of Israel, the past wasn't gone. It was alive, haunting him through that voice. He pressed his palms to his eyes, whispering, God, what is this? Am I losing my mind? Or is there a reason it's starting now? The central riddle burned in his chest. How do you escape the shadows of old age when they're woven from your own regrets? He couldn't run forever. The apartment felt like a cage, the sea outside mocking his isolation. No more hiding. He decided then, in that dim light, tomorrow he'd go to the synagogue in Haifa, talk to the rabbi, maybe even light a yahrzeit candle for Sarah. Seek answers in the old ways. As he stepped out into the night, the book of Psalms slipped from the shelf. opened to a page where Sarah's name was scrawled in faded ink, like a sign. Israel's pulse quickened. This path led deeper into the unknown, but turning back meant surrendering to the silence. Stick with me, dear listener. By the end, you'll see why we Jews don't fear these later years as an end, but as a door to truths that can light your own path. The real story, it's just beginning. Israel woke with the first light filtering through the curtains of his Haifa apartment, the sea's murmur a distant comfort. That decision from the night before clung to him like morning dew. He couldn't shake the pull of Sarah's whisper or the open book of Psalms. No more waiting for the shadows to fade. He dressed in his old wool coat, the one from Moscow days, and headed to the little synagogue down the hill. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of fresh challah from a nearby bakery, and as he walked, his steps felt lighter, almost hopeful. Inside the shul, the minyan was gathering, 10 men, faces etched with the same lines time carves on us all. He slipped into a seat near the back, murmuring the prayers under his breath, letting the familiar Hebrew words wrap around him like an old blanket. That's when he spotted David, his friend from the old country, the one who'd emigrated years before. David's eyes lit up. "Israel, it's been too long, brother. You look like you've seen a ghost." Israel hesitated, then spilled it all, the voice at the grave, the candlestick appearing from nowhere. David chuckled softly, clapping him on the shoulder. "Ah, that's no ghost. The Torah teaches us that in our later years, the echoes of those we loved come back to guide us, like ancestors whispering from the scrolls. Don't fight it, embrace it." They talked through the service, David sharing stories of his own losses, how he'd light a candle every Shabbat for his late wife Rachel, turning grief into a quiet ritual. Israel felt a spark. Maybe this was the way. Back home that evening, he dusted off the candlestick, placed it on the table, and lit it as the sun dipped low. The flame danced steady, and for the first time in months, the apartment didn't feel so empty. Old age isn't the end, he thought, a small smile tugging at his lips. It's a conversation with the past, deepening like good wine. He even called Aaron, leaving a message. "Son, let's talk soon. I've been hearing your mother." Hope bloomed in his chest. This simple act, this echo, might just mend the frayed threads of his life. But hope, my friends, can be a fragile thing in these twilight years, and it didn't take long for the cracks to show. The next Shabbat arrived with a soft rain pattering on the window, and Israel prepared the table just so. Challah, wine, the candlestick glowing. David came over, bringing a bottle from the market, and they shared a meal like in the old days in Moscow. As the blessings ended, Israel lit the candle again, whispering Sarah's name. The flame leaped high, unnaturally bright, and then the room shifted. Smoke curled into shapes, and there she was, Sarah, not as the frail woman who'd passed, but young, vibrant, her eyes sharp with something like reproach. "Israel," her voice echoed, clear as the day they married. "You think this light brings me back? You ignored us for your work, left Aaron to fend alone. Now you call on echoes because you're afraid of the silence you've made?" He recoiled, knocking over the wine glass, red staining the cloth like blood. David steadied him, but Israel waved him off, heart hammering. "It's nothing, just the light playing tricks," he gasped. But deep down, he knew. The vision lingered in his mind as David left, concern furrowing his brow. That night, alone, Israel pored over the Psalms again, but the words blurred. The stakes weren't just his loneliness anymore. This shadow reached back to his family, to Aaron, who hadn't spoken to him properly in years. Guilt twisted like a knife, all those late nights at the factory, missing birthdays, Sarah's quiet pleas. His chest tightened, a familiar ache. The doctor in Moscow had warned him about his heart, how stress in old age could tip the scales. But he couldn't stop now. The next morning, pale and determined, he booked a bus to Tel Aviv. Aaron lived there, building a life without him. "I have to face this," Israel muttered, packing a small bag with Sarah's note. No more rituals or whispers. He needed real words, real reconciliation. The bus ride was bumpy, the Mediterranean blurring past, and with each mile, the fear grew. This wasn't just about Sarah's echo. It was about the debts old age demands we pay, or lose everything. The confrontation came faster than Israel imagined, under the harsh sun of Tel Aviv. He found Aaron at a seaside cafe, the young man, now in his 40s, sipping coffee, looking every bit the successful engineer he'd become. "Dad, what are you doing here?" Aaron's voice was clipped, surprise masking irritation. Israel sat, hands clasped to hide the tremble. "I came because I've been hearing her, Aaron, your mother, and it's making me see what I missed." He pulled out the note, Sarah's words about deepening like wine, and poured it all out. The grave, the candlestick, the vision accusing him of neglect. Aaron listened, face hardening. "Now you hear her? After all these years of silence? You were always at work, Dad. Mom cried alone. I grew up resenting you. Don't bring ghosts to fix what you broke." The words hit like a wave, but Israel pressed on, voice cracking. "I'm trying, son. Let me make it right. Come to Haifa. Light a candle with me." Something shifted. Aaron's eyes softened, just a fraction. He took the note, tracing Sarah's handwriting. "She always said you had a good heart, buried under all that ambition. Fine, I'll visit next month." They parted with a stiff hug, and Israel boarded the bus home, exhaustion pulling at him like lead. Victory, he thought. A bridge rebuilt, the echo quieted. But as the miles rolled by, pain bloomed in his chest, sharp and unrelenting. By the time he stumbled into his apartment, sweat soaking his shirt, the world tilted. He collapsed, the phone slipping from his hand before he could call for help. Neighbors found him hours later, rushing him to the hospital in Haifa. The doctor, a kind woman with tired eyes, shook her head. "Your heart's strained, Israel. This stress, it's the chain you've worn too long. At your age, pushing like this, you might not get another chance." Lying in the sterile bed, monitors beeping, Israel stared at the ceiling. Aaron's promise felt hollow now. The visit was a bandage on a wound too deep. Everything he'd fought for, the ritual, the talk, had only worsened the storm. Despair settled like dust. Old age wasn't a guide or a deepening. It was a thief stripping him bare, and he'd lost the fight before it truly began. In the quiet hum of the hospital room in Haifa, Israel lay staring at the white ceiling, the beeps of the monitors a steady reminder of how fragile these later years could be. The doctor's words echoed like a judgment. A strained heart, chains of stress he'd forged himself. Everything he'd tried, the synagogue, the candle, the trip to Aaron, had only tightened the knots, leaving him more alone than before. "What's left?" he whispered to the empty air, tears tracing paths down his weathered cheeks. Sarah's voice was silent now, the echoes faded to a dull ache. He felt like a discarded page from the Torah, worn and forgotten, his life reduced to this bed, this regret. No strength for another fight. Old age had won, stripping away the illusions of control. He closed his eyes, the weight of 65 years pressing down, and let the darkness come, welcoming the surrender. But in that deepest dark, just before the dawn creeps in, something stirred. A flicker, small but persistent. Israel drifted in half-sleep, and a memory surfaced, unbidden, from his father's lips back in Odessa. "Laughter, my boy, is a bird that flies free from sorrow's cage, as the Talmud hints in its tales of wise fools." It wasn't a thunderclap, but a quiet connecting of threads, the whispers, the vision of Sarah, Aaron's anger, they all stemmed from the heavy seriousness he'd carried like a stone in his heart. All those years, he'd buried joy under duty, letting work eclipse the simple laughs around the Shabbat table. The candlestick hadn't moved by magic. It was his mind's way of pulling him back to what mattered, the light-hearted bonds that endure. Eyes snapping open, Israel sat up slowly, ignoring the twinge in his chest. This wasn't the end. It was a call to shift, to use humor as the key to unlock the chains. He reached for the phone on the bedside table, fingers steady for the first time in days. The plan formed clear and bold, no more solemn rituals. He'd invite David, Haim, even the other neighbors from the minyan, and ask Aaron to come too. A funny Shabbat, stories, jokes about our creaky knees and wandering minds, turning the table into a haven of shared chuckles instead of shadows. Risky, yes, with his heart still tender, but it was the only path left. If laughter can lighten the load, he murmured, then let's see if it can mend a family. Hope, real and tentative, warmed him like the first sip of tea. The evening of the funny Shabbat arrived with a golden sunset over Haifa, painting the sea in hues of orange and deep blue. Israel, discharged that morning with strict warnings from the doctor, had transformed his small apartment, the table laden with challah, fish, and wine, but no heavy candles, just a cluster of tea lights for warmth. Invites went out simply, "Come laugh with an old fool who's learning late." David arrived first, arms full of grape juice. "To keep your heart happy." And soon the room filled, Haim with his Odessa tales, a couple from the shul, even a shy widow named Rachel who'd lost her husband young. The air buzzed with anticipation, but the door stayed shut on Aaron's arrival. As blessings wrapped up, Israel stood, glass in hand. Friends, we've all lost pieces in these years, the steps we can't take, the faces we miss. But tonight, no tears. Let's share the silly sides of growing old. He started with a light story, how in Moscow he'd once tripped over his own feet, chasing a bus, landing in a puddle to Sarah's endless giggles. The room erupted. David slapped the table, recounting his failed attempt at dancing at a wedding, knees buckling like a bad joke. Laughter rippled, easing the lines on their faces, but then the door creaked open. Aaron stepped in, coat damp from the evening mist, expression guarded. "Dad, this? After the hospital?" Israel nodded, pulling him to a chair. "Sit, son. Hear this one. Your mother once caught me singing off-key in the shower. Said I sounded like a cat in the market, but she joined in anyway." Aaron's lips twitched, but the wall held. Tension thickened as wine flowed. Aaron's questions turned sharp. "You think jokes fix years of absence? Mom deserved better than your silences." The room hushed, eyes on Israel, the fragile victory slipping. He felt the old ache rise, but remembered the epiphany, laughter as the bird, not the cage. "Maybe not fix," he admitted, voice steady, "but lighten, like when you were little, and we'd play who can make the silliest face to cheer your mom after a hard day. Remember? She laughed till tears came. The good kind." Aaron paused, the memory hitting home, and a reluctant chuckle escaped. "Yeah, you always lost at that." The dam broke, stories poured out, Aaron sharing his own mishaps in Tel Aviv, the group weaving in, bonds forming in the shared absurdity of life's stumbles. No grand speeches, just the warmth of voices overlapping, the pain of separation dissolving in the glow. By night's end, as guests departed with hugs and promises of more, Aaron lingered. It feels like home again, Dad." Israel nodded, the echo of Sarah now a gentle smile in his mind, not a haunt. The confrontation wasn't a battle won with force, but with the simple power of joy, proving that in our later chapters, laughter could be the strongest thread holding us together. Weeks turned to months in Haifa's gentle rhythm, the sea always there like a faithful friend. Israel returned to his routines, but transformed, no longer solitary walks, but strolls with David and Haim, trading quips about forgetting names or chasing grandchildren who visited more often now. The hospital scare faded to a cautionary tale, his heart steadier with the lightness he'd embraced. Aaron came every other Shabbat, not always with jokes, but with presence, helping in the kitchen, sharing about his work, the distance between them bridged by those evenings of easy talk. The apartment, once a tomb of memories, became alive again. Photos dusted, the candlestick lit without fear, its flame a symbol of enduring light rather than loss. Israel found himself wiser in the quiet moments, teaching the Minyan group a bit from the Psalms on Sundays, emphasizing how our later years deepen understanding if we let go of the weights. Age doesn't steal, he'd say softly. It reveals, if you laugh through the revealing. One crisp afternoon, months later, Israel walked to Sarah's grave, the wind kinder now. He placed a small stone there, as is our way, and whispered, "We found the joy again." Turning toward home, the sun warm on his face, he felt the circle complete. Not an end, but a fuller beginning, where relationships anchored without dragging, buoyed by the laughter that had set them free. In that moment, standing by the sea, Israel knew the truth we'd all chase. These years hold gifts wrapped in trials, waiting for us to unwrap them with open hearts. Israel sat at the kitchen table with Aaron the morning after that first funny Shabbat, the sun streaming through the window in Haifa, casting a soft glow on the challah crumbs from the night before. The apartment hummed with a rare peace, no echoes, no shadows lurking in the corners. Aaron poured them both tea, the steam rising like a gentle sigh of relief. "Dad, last night, it was good. Felt like Mom was there, smiling." Israel nodded, his hand steady on the cup, the ache in his chest now just a faint memory. The laughter had worked its quiet magic, knitting them closer without force. Guests had left with warm goodbyes, promising to return, and for the first time in years, the place didn't echo with emptiness. "The nightmare's over, son," Israel said softly, a small smile creasing his face. "We've turned the page." The sea whispered outside, calm as the moment, and Israel allowed himself to breathe easy. Life in these later years could be simple again, mended and whole. But in that very stillness, as Aaron stepped out to catch the bus back to Tel Aviv, Israel lingered at the table, tracing the edge of the candlestick with his finger. A stray thought tugged at him, pulling at the loose threads of the past weeks, the grave, the whispers, the hospital bed. He glanced at Sarah's photo on the wall, her eyes seeming to hold a deeper knowing. And then it hit, slow at first, like dawn breaking over the Mediterranean. No, it wasn't the end of the storm he needed to fear. The real unraveling came in a flash of clarity, piercing the calm. It wasn't about the loneliness or the echoes from the grave, he realized, voice barely above a whisper to the empty room. Not even the years piling up like stones on a path. The true enemy, the one that had chained him all along, was his own unyielding pride, the refusal to forgive himself for the choices of youth, the absences that built walls around his heart. Everything shifted in that instant. The voice at the cemetery? Not a haunting, but a mirror reflecting the guilt he'd ignored, the way he'd prioritized work over Sarah's quiet pleas, over Aaron's childhood needs. The candlestick's mystery? His subconscious urging him to face the neglect, not some supernatural pull. The vision during Shabbat, the heart scare after seeing Aaron, they weren't punishments from age, but echoes of his inner battle, where pride had masked the simple truth. He'd hurt them by not admitting his flaws sooner. Even the laughter that saved the evening, It only worked because in joking about his stumbles, he'd cracked the armor of self-importance. The victories felt bittersweet now, tragic in their delay. How many years wasted fighting shadows outside when the fight was within? Israel sank back in the chair, tears welling not from sorrow, but from the raw honesty of it. Forgiving himself wasn't easy. It meant dismantling the man he'd built, the proud provider who justified every missed moment. But in that revelation, a weight lifted, subtle as the sea's tide receding. Old age, it seemed, wasn't the thief. It was the revealer, forcing us to confront the pride that keeps us isolated long after the world has moved on. And in that profound shift, Israel's story stopped being just one man's quiet struggle in Haifa. It became a mirror for all of us who've walked these later paths, feeling the pull of what was and what might have been. What if the greatest foe we face as the years accumulate isn't the creak of our bones or the silence of empty rooms, but the hidden pride in our hearts that blinds us to our own need for grace? That's the question hanging in the air, my friends, the one that leads us to the heart of it all, the truths our Jewish heritage has whispered through generations. Stay with me. The most important part is still unfolding. But what happened to Israel in the quiet days that followed wasn't the real turning point, my friends. Far more vital was understanding why these later years stir up such storms in the first place, why the whispers and the aches hit harder after 65. You've felt it, haven't you? That moment when a memory sneaks up, not as comfort, but as a question. Why do we cling so tightly to regrets when the world urges us to let go? That's the thread running through Israel's tale, the one that pulls us all in, making his path our own. I, Haim, from those dusty streets of Odessa to the salty air of Haifa, have watched it unfold in so many lives. Neighbors in the minyan, old friends at the Shabbat table. Few speak of it plainly, but it's there, woven into our stories like the fringes on a tallit, subtle yet essential. This isn't just one man's journey, it's a reflection of how age reveals what we've overlooked, inviting us to see deeper if we're willing to listen. Listen closely now, because here's the part that lingers, the insight our Jewish wisdom has held close for generations, passed down not in grand sermons, but in the quiet nods over tea. The secret lies in 5 truths about aging, truths that explain not only Israel's echoes and breakthroughs, but the very rhythms of our own hearts as the years accumulate. First, old age isn't a fading curtain. It's the echo of our ancestors, a living chorus from the Torah's scrolls, giving us strength through their voices rather than leaving us adrift in silence. Second, the pains we feel, those sharp reminders of loss, don't weaken us. They birth new resilience, drawing from memories like roots, pulling water from deep soil, turning sorrow into the quiet power that sustains. Third, our relationships in these years, with children, friends, even the shadows of those gone, aren't chains dragging us down, but anchors of freedom, holding us steady if we infuse them with understanding and grace instead of old grudges. Fourth, laughter becomes our sharpest tool against time's relentless march. A bird slipping free from the cage, lightening the load just as the Talmud's wise tales remind us to find joy in our stumbles. And fifth, the deepest wisdom of all blooms, not from knowledge alone, but from forgiving ourselves. The pride, the missed moments, the paths not taken, releasing that inner stone so our later chapters can flow like the sea, unburdened and true. These aren't rules etched in stone. They're lights flickering in the candlestick of life, showing how each of us circles these patterns until we choose to step into the glow. Israel's story proves it. By embracing these truths, he didn't just survive the twilight, he let it illuminate him. So, what pattern from your own echoes are you ready to forgive today, to let laughter and grace reshape your days? Ponder that, as we all do in these thoughtful hours. Stories like Israel's, drawn from the well of Jewish insight to shift how we walk these later roads, we share here often. To catch the next one that might just brighten your own path, you know the way. Stay close, and may your inner light endure.